Maya Carter stood in line at the First Colonial Bank, holding a check that represented her future. The 23-year-old woman had just earned her doctorate in xenobiology and landed her first job at Helix 7, an important research station orbiting Earth. The check in her hand was her signing bonus, 75,000 credits that would help her pay off student loans and finally move out of her cramped apartment in the lower districts of New Houston. She looked around the bank lobby, taking in the expensive decorations and holographic displays showing stock prices from across the solar system. Mars mining companies, asteroid prospecting businesses, and faster-than-light technology firms flashed their numbers on the walls. This was a bank for wealthy people, but Maya had earned the right to be here. Her education and hard work had brought her to this moment. The line moved slowly as customers ahead of her completed their transactions. Maya glanced down at her worn jacket and simple clothes, feeling a bit out of place among the well-dressed professionals around her. But she pushed those thoughts aside. She belonged here just as much as anyone else. When the display screen finally showed her number, Maya walked to the desk where a middle-aged man sat behind a polished counter. His nameplate read Gregory Palmer, branch manager. He had gray hair and wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Maya spent on clothes in a year. Palmer was typing on his computer terminal and barely looked up when she approached. Maya placed the check on the desk between them and spoke politely. She wanted to deposit this check, please. Palmer picked up the check with 2 fingers like it might be dirty. His eyes moved across the paper, reading the amount written there. Maya watched as his expression changed from boredom to suspicion. He looked at the 75,000 credit amount. Then his gaze moved from the check to Maya. He studied her face, her clothes, and the color of her skin. The way he looked at her made Maya feel uncomfortable, like she had done something wrong just by standing there. Palmer's voice was sharp when he spoke. Where did she get this check? Maya felt confused by his tone but answered calmly. It was her signing bonus from the Helix 7 Research Institute. She had just accepted a position there as a xenobiologist. She was proud of her achievement and expected Palmer to congratulate her, or at least process the check normally. Instead, his lips pressed together in a thin line that showed disapproval. He held the check up to the light, examining it like a detective looking for clues. This looked fraudulent to him, Palmer announced loudly. The bank had been having problems with forged checks in this district. Maya's stomach dropped. The check was not fraudulent, she insisted, keeping her voice steady even though embarrassment was starting to heat her cheeks. He could verify it with the institute. She reached for her tablet to show him her employment contract, proof that everything was legitimate. Other customers in the bank were starting to notice their conversation. People turned to look, some whispering to each other. Maya felt their eyes on her and wanted to disappear. But Palmer was already shaking his head before she could pull up the documents on her tablet. What happened next shocked Maya so completely that she froze in place. Palmer grasped the check with both hands and tore it in half. The ripping sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet bank. But he did not stop there. He tore the halves into quarters, then let the pieces fall onto the desk between them like confetti. Palmer announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear that he was not going to let her commit fraud in his bank. He suggested she leave before he called security. His words echoed through the lobby, and Maya felt every eye in the building focused on her. Maya stared at the torn pieces of her check, unable to believe what had just happened. Her signing bonus, the money she had earned through years of hard work and study, now lay in pieces on a bank desk. She opened her mouth to protest, to demand that Palmer call the institute and verify the check, but no words came out. A security guard was already walking toward them, his hand resting on the stun baton at his belt. The guard was a large man who looked at Maya with suspicion, as if she really was a criminal trying to steal from the bank. Palmer stood up and gestured to the security guard. The guard placed a hand on Maya's elbow, not roughly but firmly enough to make it clear she needed to leave. Maya looked around at the other customers, hoping someone would speak up and defend her. But they all avoided her eyes, some recording the scene with their neural implants while others simply watched like this was entertainment. Maya had never felt so humiliated in her life. She had done nothing wrong, committed no crime, but she was being treated like a thief. The security guard escorted Maya to the door while Palmer watched with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked satisfied, like he had done a good job protecting his bank from a dangerous criminal. Maya walked through the lobby with her head up, refusing to let them see how much this hurt. But inside, she felt like crying. The automatic doors slid open and she stepped out onto the street, feeling the warm air of New Houston hit her face. The guard stayed in the doorway, watching to make sure she did not try to come back inside. Maya walked away from the bank on shaking legs. She found a bench near a fountain and sat down, pulling out her communicator with trembling hands. She stared at the device for a long moment, trying to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to handle this herself, to march back into that bank and demand justice. But another part of her knew that would not work. Palmer had made up his mind about her the moment he saw her face. No amount of proof or argument would change what he believed. She scrolled through her contacts until she reached her mother's name. Victoria Carter had always taught Maya to fight her own battles, to stand on her own 2 feet and never rely on anyone else to solve her problems. Maya had tried to live by that principle her entire life. She had worked hard in school, earned scholarships, and built her career through her own efforts. But this situation felt different. This was not just a setback or a challenge to overcome. This was discrimination, pure and simple. Palmer had looked at her and decided she could not possibly have earned 75,000 credits honestly. Maya hesitated with her finger over the call button. Her mother was a busy woman, probably in the middle of an important meeting. Victoria Carter was one of the most successful business executives in the solar system, running a company that spanned 3 planets and dozens of space stations. She had built her fortune from nothing, starting with a small shipping company and expanding into manufacturing, real estate, and financial services. Maya had always been proud of her mother, but also determined to succeed on her own merits, not because of family connections, but right now, sitting on this bench with torn check pieces still vivid in her mind. Maya realized that sometimes asking for help was not weakness. It was necessary. She pressed the call button and waited while the communicator connected. The holographic display flickered to life, showing her mother's face. Victoria Carter looked exactly like Maya remembered from their last call, elegant and professional in a tailored business suit. She appeared to be inside a luxury shuttle, heading to some important meeting. Her mother smiled when she saw Maya's face, but the smile faded quickly. Victoria could read her daughter well enough to know something was wrong. She asked if everything was all right, her voice filled with concern. Maya took a deep breath and told her mother what had happened. She described going to the bank, presenting her check, and how Palmer had torn it up without even trying to verify it. She explained being escorted out by security while other customers watched and recorded the whole thing. By the time she finished talking, her voice was shaking and tears were threatening to fall. Victoria's expression did not change much as she listened, but something hardened in her eyes. When Maya finished speaking, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she asked for the manager's name. Maya told her it was Gregory Palmer. Victoria nodded slowly, and Maya could see her mother's mind working behind those calculating eyes. Victoria told Maya not to worry about the check. She would handle everything. Maya should go home, have some tea, and try to relax. The money would be taken care of. Maya asked what her mother planned to do. Victoria's smile was cold as she answered. That board meeting she had mentioned at the start of their call, it was with First Colonial Bank's executive committee. She owned more shares in that bank than anyone else in the solar system. The call ended before Maya could respond, leaving her staring at empty air where her mother's holographic image had been. Maya sat on the bench for a long time, processing what her mother had just revealed. She had not known about those bank shares. Then again, her mother's business empire was so vast and complicated that Maya could not keep track of all the investments and acquisitions. But one thing was certain now. Gregory Palmer had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Gregory Palmer returned to his desk feeling satisfied with himself. He had stopped what he believed was an obvious fraud attempt and protected his bank's assets. The rest of his afternoon looked peaceful with no difficult customers scheduled. He opened his terminal to review some quarterly reports, thinking about the performance bonus he might receive for preventing that fraudulent transaction. The numbers on his screen showed healthy profits for the downtown branch, and Palmer allowed himself a small smile. Life was good. His terminal chimed with an incoming message that pulled him away from the financial reports. Palmer glanced at the notification and saw it was marked Priority 1 from headquarters. That was unusual but not alarming. He opened the message with mild curiosity that quickly transformed into confusion. All branch managers were required to attend an emergency virtual meeting in 5 minutes. Attendance was mandatory with no exceptions. Palmer frowned at his screen. In his 15 years working for First Colonial Bank, he had never seen an all-hands meeting called with such short notice. Something serious must have happened. He logged into the conference system and joined the virtual meeting room. The other branch managers were already appearing on screen, their faces showing the same confusion Palmer felt. There were 43 branch managers in the new Houston metropolitan area, and they all looked puzzled about this sudden meeting. Palmer recognized several colleagues he had worked with over the years. They exchanged questioning glances through their video feeds, but nobody seemed to know what was happening. The meeting room fell silent when the bank's chief executive officer appeared on everyone's screens. Harold Chen looked uncomfortable in a way Palmer had never seen before. The CEO was normally calm and collected during meetings, always in control of every situation. But now Chen was sweating despite the climate-controlled comfort of his executive office. Beads of perspiration were visible on his forehead, and his tie looked slightly loose like he had been tugging at it. Chen thanked everyone for joining on such short notice, his voice strained. He had been instructed by the board of directors to address a serious incident that had occurred at one of their downtown branches approximately 1 hour ago. Palmer felt a cold sensation start in his stomach and spread through his body. Chen continued speaking, his words measured and careful. A customer had entered one of their branches with a completely legitimate check from a respected research institution. This customer, a young woman, had been accused of fraud by a branch manager. The manager had not followed any verification protocols or proper procedures. Instead, he had destroyed the customer's property and had her escorted from the premises by security. The entire incident had been witnessed by multiple people and recorded on their neural implants. The other branch managers looked shocked and began whispering among themselves. "Who would do something so stupid?" someone asked. Palmer wanted to speak to defend himself, but his throat had closed up. He could not make any sound come out. Chen's face had gone from uncomfortable to genuinely angry as he continued. This behavior was not only a violation of their policies and procedures, but also a disgrace to everything the institution stood for. He had been informed that the incident was already circulating on social media. Videos were being shared across Earth's networks and spreading to Mars and the Belt colonies. Palmer's hands were shaking now. He gripped the edge of his desk to steady himself, but it did not help. Chen explained that the board of directors had conducted an emergency session to discuss the situation. Their largest shareholder had made it absolutely clear that this kind of discriminatory behavior would not be tolerated in any business she was associated with. This shareholder had given them an ultimatum: take immediate and decisive action or she would divest all her holdings and make the reason public. Given that she owned nearly 30% of the bank's shares, her departure would likely cause the stock price to collapse. One of the other branch managers raised a virtual hand and asked who the customer was. Chen's expression became grim as he answered. The customer was Maya Carter. Her mother was Victoria Carter, the billionaire CEO of Carter Industries. The virtual conference room went completely silent. Every manager knew that name. Victoria Carter was one of the most powerful business executives in the solar system. Her company's decisions could make or break entire markets. She had built a fortune estimated at over 3 billion credits through decades of hard work and strategic investments. And Palmer had humiliated her daughter. Palmer felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. His comfortable world was tilting sideways and he could not stop it. Chen was still talking, but Palmer barely heard the words. Something about immediate termination and cooperation with investigators. Something about new training programs and policy changes. Palmer's mind was spinning too fast to process everything. He had torn up a check belonging to Victoria Carter's daughter. He had called her a fraud in front of witnesses. He had had her escorted out by security like she was a common criminal. The meeting ended shortly after that. Chen disconnected first, followed by the other branch managers who were probably grateful they were not involved in this disaster. Palmer sat alone at his desk, staring at his blank screen. His terminal chimed again with another message. This one was from Human Resources. He was instructed to pack his personal belongings immediately. A security team would escort him from the building. His employment with First Colonial Bank was terminated effective immediately. He would receive no severance package. His benefits would end at midnight tonight. Palmer read the message 3 times before it really sank in. 15 years of service gone in an instant. His career in banking probably finished. No other financial institution would hire him after this. He stood up on unsteady legs and looked around his office. The plaques on the wall showing his achievements. The photos of him receiving awards. The expensive desk accessories he had collected over the years. All of it meaningless now. He pulled a cardboard box from his supply closet and began putting his personal items inside. The security team arrived within minutes. 2 large men in uniform stood in his doorway, watching as he packed. They did not speak to him or offer any sympathy. They just watched, making sure he did not take anything that belonged to the bank. Palmer worked quickly, throwing items into the box without really looking at them. He wanted to get out of here as fast as possible. The other employees were staring at him through the glass walls of his office. Some looked shocked. Others looked satisfied, like they had never liked him and were glad to see him fall. When he finished packing, the security team escorted him through the bank lobby. It was the same path he had watched Maya Carter take just hours earlier. Palmer realized with sick clarity that he was experiencing exactly what he had put her through. The shame, the humiliation, the eyes of strangers watching his downfall. But unlike Maya, he actually deserved this treatment. He had earned every moment of this disgrace. The security team led him out the front door and told him he was not welcome on bank property anymore. If he returned, they would call the police. Palmer stood on the sidewalk holding his cardboard box, watching people walk past him without a second glance. He pulled out his personal communicator and checked his social media feeds. The videos were already there, posted by customers who had been in the bank during the incident. He watched himself tear up Maya's check. He heard his own voice accusing her of fraud. He saw the look on her face, the shock and humiliation. The videos had been viewed millions of times already. The comments were brutal. People called him racist, which Palmer had never thought of himself as before. People said he got what he deserved. Some comments were so angry that they frightened him. He closed the social media app and just stood there, not knowing where to go or what to do. His car was in the parking garage, but he was not allowed back inside the building to get it. He would have to call for a transport. Palmer felt completely lost, like his entire identity had been stripped away. He had been a branch manager, a respected professional, a man with authority and status. Now he was nothing. Meanwhile, across the city in her luxury office at Carter Industries headquarters, Victoria Carter was watching the same videos on her screens. Her assistant, Peter Liu, stood nearby with a tablet, providing updates on the situation. The story had been shared over 50 million times in the past 3 hours. Public sentiment was overwhelmingly supportive of Maya. First Colonial Bank's stock had already dropped 8%. Several civil rights organizations were calling for investigations into the bank's practices. Other customers were coming forward with their own stories of discrimination. Victoria listened to Peter's report without expression. She asked about Palmer, and Peter confirmed that he had been terminated as requested. He was also being blacklisted from the financial services industry. No bank or credit union would hire him now, not with this much negative publicity attached to his name. Victoria nodded slowly. Good, she said. That was exactly what she wanted. But her expression remained hard. Ruining Palmer's career was satisfying, but it was not enough. She wanted to make sure nothing like this ever happened to anyone else. Maya's apartment was located in the lower districts of New Houston, far from the luxury towers where her mother lived. The building was old but clean, home mostly to graduate students and young professionals just starting their careers. Victoria's security team had wanted to sweep the building before letting her enter, checking for threats and securing the area. But Victoria had waved them off and told them to wait in their vehicles. She did not need an armed escort to visit her own daughter. The team had reluctantly agreed, though Victoria knew they were monitoring her location constantly through her neural implant. Victoria took the elevator up to the 3rd floor and walked down a narrow hallway to Maya's door. She could hear music playing softly inside, something classical that Maya had always loved. Victoria knocked gently and waited. The music stopped. Footsteps approached the door, and there was a pause while Maya checked the security viewer. Then the door opened and Maya stood there, looking surprised and tired. Her eyes were red like she had been crying, though her face was dry now. She wore comfortable clothes, old university sweatpants and a worn shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple style. "Mom," Maya said, her voice showing surprise. She had not known Victoria was coming. Victoria asked if she could come in, and Maya stepped aside, gesturing toward the small living room. The apartment was neat despite being cramped. Every surface held books or research papers or scientific journals. There were a few personal touches that made Victoria's heart ache. Photos of Maya's graduation ceremony, a potted plant that was somehow still alive despite Maya's busy schedule, a blanket that Victoria recognized from Maya's childhood, faded now but still soft. They sat together on the small couch and an awkward silence stretched between them. Victoria and Maya had always had a complicated relationship. Victoria had worked constantly while Maya was growing up, building her business empire and providing financial security. But that meant she had missed many important moments in her daughter's life: school plays, science fairs, graduation ceremonies that Victoria had attended but left early because of business emergencies. Maya had grown up understanding that her mother loved her, but also learning to be independent, to not rely on anyone for help. Maya broke the silence first. She had seen the news coverage, she said quietly. The story was everywhere. Videos of the bank incident had been shared millions of times. She never wanted this kind of attention. She just wanted her check deposited so she could start her new job without worrying about money. Now she was famous for being discriminated against, which was not exactly how she had planned to begin her career. Victoria listened without interrupting, letting her daughter express the feelings that had been building all afternoon. Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. People were saying she only got justice because of who her mother was, that if she had been anyone else, Palmer would still have his job and nothing would have changed. They were saying the system only worked for rich people with connections, and they were probably right, Maya admitted. Without Victoria's intervention, Palmer would have faced no consequences for what he did. Maya would have lost her signing bonus and had no way to fight back. That knowledge made her angry, but also sad. Victoria reached out and took her daughter's hand. Maya's fingers were cold despite the warm apartment. Victoria chose her words carefully because this conversation was important. She told Maya that people were probably right about the privilege and connections. But that was exactly why this situation mattered so much. Victoria had built her fortune by refusing to accept the limitations that people tried to place on her. She had worked twice as hard as her competitors. She had proven herself 3 times over. And still she had to fight for every opportunity, every contract, every shred of respect. Victoria explained that she understood why Maya was upset. Maya wanted to handle problems on her own, to prove she did not need her mother's help or money. That independence was admirable, and Victoria was proud of it. But power was not just about what someone could do for themselves. Power was about what someone could do for others. Victoria had resources, influence, and the ability to make people face consequences for their actions. Why should she not use that power for her daughter? Why should she not use it to prevent this from happening to someone else in the future? Maya pulled her hand away and stood up, pacing across the small living room. She argued that people would say she did not deserve what she had earned. They would claim she only got her position at Helix 7 because of her mother's connections. Never mind that Maya had spent years earning her doctorate. Never mind that her research on extremophile organisms was groundbreaking. People would always assume she succeeded because of family money rather than personal merit. That assumption hurt worse than Palmer's discrimination, because it came from everyone, not just one racist bank manager. Victoria stood as well and faced her daughter directly. People were going to say those things anyway, she pointed out. That was the price of having a successful parent. Every achievement Maya earned would be questioned by someone. But Maya knew the truth, and so did the people who mattered. Maya had earned her doctorate through years of dedicated study. She got her position at Helix 7 because she was brilliant, not because Victoria had made any calls or pulled any strings. The research institute had chosen Maya based on her qualifications alone. Maya turned to look at her mother, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "But it still hurt," she whispered. Victoria pulled her daughter into a hug, something they had not done in months because both of them were usually too busy for physical affection. Victoria told Maya that she understood the pain. She had experienced similar discrimination throughout her career. People had assumed she could not possibly have built Carter Industries through legitimate business practices. They invented stories about family money or lucky investments or connections to powerful men. None of it was true, but the rumors persisted anyway. The difference now, Victoria explained, was that she had enough power to fight back, not just for herself but for others facing similar problems. Palmer's termination was just the beginning. Victoria planned to use this incident as a catalyst for real change. She wanted to create programs that would prevent discrimination in banks and other institutions. She wanted to fund legal services for people who could not afford to fight back on their own. She wanted to turn Maya's painful experience into something meaningful that would help countless others. Maya pulled back from the hug and wiped her eyes. She asked what exactly Victoria was planning. Victoria smiled and explained her vision. She was going to announce a major initiative funded by Carter Industries. 500 million credits would go into a legal defense fund for discrimination victims. She would work with civil rights organizations to develop training programs for businesses. She would use her influence as a major shareholder to force policy changes across multiple industries. This incident with Palmer would be remembered not as one woman's humiliation, but as the spark that ignited meaningful reform. Maya sat back down on the couch, processing what her mother had said. 500 million credits was an enormous amount of money. That kind of funding could really change things for people who face discrimination. Training programs could prevent future incidents. Policy changes could create accountability. Maybe her humiliation could serve a larger purpose after all. But Maya still felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She was a scientist, not an activist or public figure. She just wanted to do her research in peace. Victoria assured her daughter that she would not have to be the public face of anything. Maya could return to her research and let Victoria handle the media attention. But Victoria wanted Maya's permission before moving forward. This was Maya's story and Maya's pain. Victoria would not exploit it without consent. Maya thought about that for a long moment. She remembered Palmer's face as he tore up her check. She remembered the other customers watching and recording but not speaking up. She remembered the security guard's hand on her arm, escorting her out like a criminal. If her suffering could prevent someone else from experiencing that same pain, then maybe it was worth it. Maya told her mother to go ahead with the plans. Use the incident however would be most effective. Just do not make Maya do interviews or public appearances. Victoria agreed immediately. She would handle everything. Maya could focus on her new job and her research. Victoria would make sure that Palmer's discrimination became a turning point, rather than just another forgotten incident. The two women talked for another hour, rebuilding some of the connection that had frayed over years of busy schedules and missed moments. When Victoria finally left, she felt more determined than ever. She had spent her entire career building wealth and power. Now it was time to use those resources for something more important than profit margins and stock prices. She would transform the financial industry's approach to discrimination. She would create systems that protected people regardless of their connections or resources. And she would make sure that Gregory Palmer's name became synonymous with the kind of prejudice that society would no longer tolerate. Victoria climbed into her waiting vehicle where her security team sat ready. 3 days after the bank incident, Victoria Carter stood behind a podium in the main auditorium at Carter Industries headquarters. The room was packed with journalists from every major news outlet in the solar system. Camera drones hovered near the ceiling, their lenses focused on Victoria's face. Reporters sat in rows with tablets and recording devices ready to capture every word. This auditorium had hosted many important announcements over the years. Victoria had announced major business expansions here, new partnerships, technological breakthroughs. But today's announcement would be different. Today was about justice rather than profit. Maya sat in the front row, uncomfortable with all the attention but present at her mother's request. She wore professional clothes for the occasion, though she would have preferred to be back in her laboratory preparing for her new position at Helix 7. The other people in the front row were civil rights leaders, community organizers, and representatives from various advocacy groups. Victoria had spent the past 3 days meeting with these organizations, building partnerships and gathering support for her initiative. Now it was time to announce their plans to the world. Victoria began her speech by thanking everyone for coming. She looked calm and confident in her Navy business suit, her posture radiating controlled power. She acknowledged that everyone knew why she had called this conference. The incident at First Colonial Bank had dominated headlines for 72 hours. Videos of Palmer tearing up Maya's check had been viewed hundreds of millions of times across Earth, Mars, and the Belt colonies. Public reaction had been overwhelmingly supportive of Maya and critical of Palmer. But Victoria wanted to address some broader issues that went beyond one bank manager's prejudice. Victoria's voice was strong as she spoke. What happened to Maya was not unique or special. Every single day, people faced discrimination based on their appearance, their background, or assumptions about their economic status. They were treated as criminals when they had committed no crimes. They were denied services they had every right to receive. They were humiliated in public while others watched and did nothing. The only reason Maya's case received attention was because Victoria had the resources and influence to demand accountability. That was not right. That was not justice. True justice should not depend on who someone's parents were or how much money they had in the bank. True justice should be available to everyone regardless of their connections or wealth. But the reality was different. Poor people who faced discrimination often had no way to fight back. They could not afford lawyers. They could not take time off work to pursue complaints. They had no leverage to force institutions to take their grievances seriously. So discrimination continued unchecked, hurting people who had no power to defend themselves. Victoria paused to let her words sink in. The journalists were writing furiously, recording every statement. Then Victoria announced the creation of the Fair Treatment Initiative. Carter Industries would donate 500 million credits immediately to establish this program. The money would fund legal representation for people facing discrimination. It would cover court costs, investigation expenses, and settlement negotiations. Any person who believed they had been discriminated against could apply to the initiative for help. A team of experienced lawyers would review each case and provide support for legitimate claims. The room erupted with questions, but Victoria raised her hand for silence. She was not finished. The initiative would do more than just help individual victims. Victoria was working with civil rights organizations to develop comprehensive training programs for businesses. These programs would focus on recognizing unconscious bias, following proper verification procedures, and treating all customers with equal respect regardless of their appearance. First Colonial Bank would be the first institution required to implement these programs. Victoria had used her position as their largest shareholder to make the training mandatory for all employees. Furthermore, Victoria continued, she was encouraging other financial institutions to adopt similar training. She had already contacted the chief executives of the 10 largest banks in the solar system. She had explained that discrimination was not just morally wrong but also bad for business. Banks that developed reputations for prejudice would lose customers and face costly lawsuits. Banks that implemented proper training would avoid those problems and build better relationships with diverse communities. Most of the executives had agreed to consider her proposals. Those who refused would face public pressure and potential boycotts. Victoria looked directly at the cameras recording her speech. She addressed anyone who had faced similar treatment to what Maya experienced. Those people deserved better. Their worth was not determined by someone else's prejudice or assumptions. They had every right to be treated with dignity and respect. And if they were willing to fight for justice, the Fair Treatment Initiative would fight alongside them. Applications would be accepted starting immediately through the initiative's website. Legal teams were already assembled and ready to begin reviewing cases. The questions came rapidly after that. Reporters wanted to know about funding details, legal strategies, and case selection criteria. Victoria fielded each inquiry with practiced ease. She had prepared thoroughly for this conference, anticipating every possible question. When reporters tried to make the story about family drama or personal revenge, Victoria redirected the conversation back to systemic issues. This was not about one mother protecting her daughter. This was about creating lasting change that would benefit millions of people. One reporter asked if Victoria planned to pursue criminal charges against Palmer. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Palmer had already faced consequences for his actions. He lost his job, his career, and his reputation. Those were appropriate penalties for his behavior. But Victoria was more interested in preventing future incidents than punishing past offenders. Palmer could serve as an example of what happened when discrimination was exposed. His name would be remembered as a warning to others who might consider treating customers unfairly based on prejudice. Another reporter asked Maya directly how she felt about becoming the face of this movement. Maya had been dreading that question. She leaned forward slightly and spoke into the microphone. She was not the face of anything, Maya said quietly but firmly. She was a scientist who wanted to do her research. The real faces of this movement should be the civil rights leaders who had been fighting discrimination for decades, the community organizers who worked tirelessly to support victims, the lawyers who took cases that others considered unwinnable. Maya was simply one person who experienced one incident. The movement was much bigger than her. Victoria smiled proudly at her daughter's response. That answer perfectly captured what this initiative was really about. It was not about making Maya famous or satisfying Victoria's anger. It was about supporting the people who did this work every day without recognition or adequate resources. The 500 million credits would empower those existing organizations and activists. It would amplify voices that had been speaking truth for years, but lacked the funding to reach wider audiences. Carter Industries was providing resources, but the movement itself belonged to the communities most affected by discrimination. The press conference continued for another hour. Victoria introduced representatives from partner organizations who explained their roles in the initiative. A prominent civil rights lawyer described how the legal fund would operate. A training specialist outlined the curriculum that would be taught to bank employees. Each speaker emphasized the same core message. Discrimination was unacceptable and would no longer be tolerated. Institutions that engaged in prejudiced practices would face serious consequences. People who experienced discrimination would have powerful allies supporting their fight for justice. When the conference finally ended, Maya felt exhausted but also strangely hopeful. She had watched her mother transform a humiliating personal experience into a platform for social change. Victoria had taken her wealth and influence and directed them toward a genuine problem. This was not just public relations or damage control. This was a serious commitment backed by substantial resources. Maya understood now why her mother had wanted her present at the conference. It was important for people to see that real discrimination happened to real people. Maya's presence made the issue concrete rather than abstract. After most of the journalists had left, several civil rights leaders approached Maya to thank her. They understood how difficult it must have been to relive that experience in public, but her willingness to share her story would help countless others feel less alone in their own experiences with discrimination. Maya accepted their thanks graciously, though she still felt uncomfortable with the attention. One older woman, a veteran activist who had fought discrimination for 40 years, took Maya's hand and looked her in the eyes. This was just the beginning, the woman said. Real change would take time and continued effort. But today marked an important step forward. Victoria watched these interactions from across the room. She had spent the past 3 days working almost non-stop to organize this initiative. She had called in favors, made promises. 6 months passed after Victoria's press conference and the world continued changing in ways both large and small. Maya stood in the observation deck of Helix 7, watching Earth rotate slowly against the backdrop of stars. The research station orbited 300 kilometers above the planet's surface, close enough to see continents and oceans but far enough to feel truly separate from everything happening down there. Maya had finally begun her work as a xenobiologist, and the research was exceeding all her expectations. Her team had discovered fascinating microorganisms in ice samples from Jupiter's moons. Tiny life forms that survived in conditions that should have been impossible. These extremophile organisms could teach humanity crucial lessons about adaptation and survival. Maya's papers describing their findings were generating excitement in the scientific community. Other researchers were citing her work and building on her discoveries. This was what Maya had always wanted: recognition for her scientific contributions rather than fame for being discriminated against. Up here on Helix 7, surrounded by colleagues who respected her expertise, Maya could almost forget about the bank incident that had changed so much. But the incident's effects rippled far beyond Maya's personal life. The Fair Treatment Initiative that Victoria had announced was making real progress. The legal fund had taken on over 200 cases in its first 6 months. Lawyers funded by the initiative had won judgments against businesses, schools, and government agencies that engaged in discriminatory behavior. Each victory set precedents that made it harder for future discrimination to go unpunished. Each settlement sent a message that prejudice would no longer be tolerated or ignored. The training programs Victoria had funded were now mandatory for all financial institutions operating under Earth's jurisdiction. Every bank employee, from tellers to executives, had to complete courses on recognizing unconscious bias and following proper verification procedures. The training included real case studies, including Palmer's treatment of Maya, dissected to show exactly where procedures had been violated. Early data suggested the programs were working. Reports of discrimination in banks had dropped by 60% since the training began. That reduction represented thousands of people who would not experience what Maya had gone through. More importantly, the publicity surrounding Maya's case had sparked broader conversations about privilege and justice. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about how systems treated people differently, based on wealth and connections. News organizations ran investigative series about discrimination in various industries. Politicians proposed new laws to strengthen protections for victims. The entire culture seemed to be shifting, slowly but noticeably, toward greater accountability. Palmer's name had become shorthand for a particular kind of casual prejudice that society was learning to recognize and reject. Maya's communicator chimed, pulling her attention away from the view of Earth. She smiled when she saw who was calling. Her mother had been busy expanding the Fair Treatment Initiative to Mars and the Belt Colonies, but they still talked regularly. Maya accepted the call and Victoria's face appeared in holographic form, looking tired but satisfied. She asked how Maya's research was progressing. Maya enthusiastically described their latest findings about the extremophile organisms. They had discovered a unique protein structure that allowed the microorganisms to survive in frozen conditions. The discovery could revolutionize understanding of how life adapted to harsh environments. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking detailed questions that showed she had been reading Maya's published papers. When the scientific discussion wound down, Victoria shared her own news. The initiative had just opened offices on Mars and was negotiating partnerships with advocacy groups in the Belt Colonies. Discrimination was not just an Earth problem. Everywhere humans went, they brought their prejudices with them. But now they also brought systems to fight those prejudices. Victoria was determined to make the initiative truly solar system-wide, protecting people no matter where they lived or worked. Maya told her mother she was proud of everything the initiative had accomplished. Victoria's response was characteristically modest. They were making a start, she said, but there was still a long way to go. Changing deeply rooted attitudes and behaviors took time. Some institutions resisted implementing the training programs. Some people complained that the initiative was too aggressive or overreaching. But Victoria remained committed to the work. She had discovered that using her wealth for social good was more satisfying than any business deal she had ever closed. They talked for a while longer, sharing news and observations about their respective work. When the call ended, Maya remained at the observation window thinking about the unexpected path her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been humiliated in a bank, escorted out by security while strangers recorded her shame. That moment had felt like the worst day of her life. But somehow her mother had transformed that pain into something meaningful. The torn check had become a symbol of resistance. The viral videos had become teaching tools. Her suffering had been converted into action that helped countless others. Maya's personal assistant, a young woman named Claire Simmons, approached with a tablet. Claire had been assigned to help Maya manage her schedule and communications, which had become more complicated since the bank incident. People constantly wanted interviews or speeches or endorsements. Maya turned down most of these requests, preferring to focus on her research. But Claire dutifully presented each opportunity so Maya could make informed decisions. Today, Claire had a message that surprised Maya. Gregory Palmer had contacted the station, asking if Maya would be willing to meet with him during her next visit to Earth. Maya's eyebrows rose. Palmer wanted to meet with her. Claire explained that his message said he wanted to apologize in person if Maya was willing. Maya stared at the tablet showing Palmer's request. She had not thought about him much in recent months. She knew he had lost his job and his career. She knew his name had become infamous. But she had been too busy with her research to follow what happened to him after the initial news coverage. Part of her wanted to simply ignore the request. Palmer did not deserve her time or attention, but another part of her was curious. What could he possibly say after 6 months? Maya told Claire to respond that she would consider meeting Palmer during her next Earth visit in 3 weeks. She could not promise anything, but she would think about it. Claire nodded and made a note on her tablet. Then she mentioned that the station director wanted to see Maya when she had time. There was good news about extending her research project and possibly expanding it to include samples from Saturn's moons. Maya smiled at that news. This was exactly what she had hoped for when she accepted the position. Real scientific work with real implications for understanding life in the universe. Over the next 3 weeks, Maya found herself thinking occasionally about Palmer's request. She discussed it with a few close friends and colleagues. Some thought she should refuse to meet him, that he did not deserve her forgiveness or attention. Others suggested that hearing his apology might provide closure. Maya remained uncertain. She did not need closure. Her life had moved forward successfully despite what Palmer had done. She had her research, her career, and the satisfaction of knowing that her experience had led to positive change. What more could Palmer add to that? But as her Earth visit approached, Maya made a decision. She would meet with Palmer, not because she needed his apology, but because she was curious about what 6 months of consequences had taught him. Had he learned anything from losing his career? Had he confronted his prejudices, or would he simply make excuses and try to minimize what he had done? Maya wanted to know if people could really change when forced to face the results of their actions. So she instructed Claire to arrange a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop in the financial district not far from where the incident had occurred. When Maya's shuttle landed at the new Houston spaceport, the city looked the same as always. Tall buildings reaching toward the sky, vehicles flowing through designated lanes, people hurrying about their business. But Maya knew that beneath the familiar surface, things had changed. The banks operating in those buildings had new training requirements. The businesses in those towers had updated their policies. The people walking those streets were more aware of discrimination and more willing to speak up when they witnessed it. Maya's humiliation had contributed to those changes, however small they might be. She checked into her hotel and prepared for the meeting with Palmer. She chose professional but casual clothes, nothing too formal or too relaxed. She did not want to give him the satisfaction of thinking she had dressed specially for this meeting. Maya arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and secured a table near the back where they would have some privacy. She ordered tea and waited, watching the door. Right on time, a man entered who barely resembled the confident bank manager she remembered. Palmer looked like he had aged 10 years and 6 months. His hair had gone completely gray and he had lost considerable weight. There was a defeated quality to his posture, the bearing of someone who had been thoroughly broken by consequences. Maya sat across from Palmer in the coffee shop, studying his face as he spoke. He looked genuinely remorseful, but Maya had learned that appearances could be deceiving. People often expressed regret when facing consequences, not because they understood what they did wrong, but because they disliked the punishment. She wanted to determine which type of remorse Palmer was experiencing. So she asked him directly what he expected from this meeting. Was he looking for forgiveness? Did he want her to help restore his reputation? Palmer shook his head firmly. He did not expect forgiveness and knew he did not deserve it. Palmer explained that he asked for this meeting because he wanted Maya to know that consequences had led to real change. Not just for him personally, but across the entire banking industry. After losing his job, Palmer had spent weeks feeling angry and sorry for himself. He blamed Maya, blamed Victoria, blamed social media for making such a big deal out of one mistake. But eventually that anger faded, and Palmer was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. He started seeing a counselor who specialized in helping people recognize their unconscious biases. The sessions were difficult and often painful. Through counseling, Palmer discovered that his prejudices ran deeper than he had realized. He had absorbed his family's attitudes as a child, and those beliefs had shaped his worldview in subtle ways. He had made assumptions about people based on their appearance throughout his career. Maya was not the first person he had treated unfairly, just the first time his discrimination had serious consequences. Palmer attended workshops and training sessions about recognizing bias. He read books and articles about discrimination. He listened to stories from people who had experienced what Maya went through. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand the harm he had caused. Maya listened to all this without showing much reaction. She appreciated that Palmer was doing the work to change himself, but she also knew that many people did similar work only to revert to old patterns once the pressure was off. She asked him what he was doing now, how he was spending his days since he could no longer work in banking. Palmer's expression became more animated as he answered. He had started volunteering with the Fair Treatment Initiative that Victoria had created. The irony was not lost on him, working for an organization founded because of his own discrimination. But the initiative's leadership had allowed him to participate after extensive vetting. Palmer now helped develop the training programs that were being implemented across the financial industry. He shared his story as a cautionary tale during workshops, explaining exactly how unconscious bias had affected his decision-making. He described the moment he looked at Maya and made instant judgments based on prejudice rather than evidence. He analyzed his own thought process, breaking down each assumption and showing how it led to discrimination. This vulnerability made the training more effective because participants could see that anyone might harbor similar biases without realizing it. Maya found herself somewhat impressed despite her initial skepticism. Using himself as a negative example took courage and genuine commitment to change. But she still needed to understand his motivations. She asked why he was really doing this work. Was it genuine desire to help, or was he trying to rehabilitate his image? Palmer considered the question carefully before answering. Initially, he admitted it had been partly about redemption. He wanted to prove he was not just a racist villain. He wanted people to see that he could change. But somewhere along the way, the motivation had shifted. Working with discrimination victims and hearing their stories had fundamentally changed Palmer's perspective. He met people who had lost jobs because of prejudice. He met families that had been denied housing. He met students who had been unfairly disciplined in schools. Every story reminded him of what he had done to Maya, the casual cruelty of making assumptions based on appearance. He began to understand that discrimination was not just individual bad acts, but a systemic problem that harmed millions of people. His work with the initiative became less about personal redemption and more about contributing to real solutions. Palmer pulled out a tablet and showed Maya some statistics. The training programs he helped develop had now been completed by over 50,000 bank employees across Earth. Similar incidents to what happened with Maya had dropped by 60% in institutions that implemented the training. That reduction represented thousands of people who would not experience discrimination. More importantly, when incidents did occur, they were being handled properly. Managers were following verification procedures. Employees were speaking up when they witnessed unfair treatment. The culture was genuinely changing, slowly but measurably. Maya looked at the data on Palmer's tablet. The numbers were impressive and aligned with reports she had heard from her mother. The Fair Treatment Initiative was making real progress. But Maya wanted to challenge Palmer on something that bothered her. She pointed out that he was able to do this redemptive work because he was a white man with professional credentials. If he had been a person of color who committed the same act, would he have been given the same opportunities to rehabilitate his reputation? Palmer's face flushed, but he nodded in acknowledgement. She was right, he admitted. His race and gender afforded him second chances that others might not receive. That awareness of his privilege was something Palmer had gained through counseling and training. He understood now that the same system that had protected him throughout his career, allowing him to harbor unconscious biases without serious consequences, was now giving him opportunities to rebuild that others would not get. It was unfair, but it was reality. The best thing he could do was use those unfair advantages to help dismantle the system that granted them. That meant being honest about his privilege in the training programs he helped develop. It meant amplifying voices of people who had experienced discrimination rather than centering his own redemption story. Maya appreciated Palmer's honest answer. Many people refuse to acknowledge their privilege even when confronted with clear evidence. Palmer seemed genuinely committed to understanding how systems of power and discrimination operated. But Maya had one more important question. She asked if he had apologized to anyone else he might have discriminated against during his career. Palmer's expression became pained. He had tried, he said, through his counseling. He had identified several incidents where his biases likely affected his decisions. He had tracked down some of those people and offered apologies. Some had accepted, finding his remorse genuine. Others had refused to speak with him, which was entirely their right. One person in particular haunted Palmer's memory. A young Latino man who had tried to open a business account several years ago. Palmer had made the process unnecessarily difficult, demanding excessive documentation and treating the man with suspicion. The account was eventually approved, but the man had later moved his business to another bank. Palmer had located him and apologized, explaining how bias had affected his behavior. The man had listened politely but declined Palmer's apology. He said Palmer's change of heart did not undo the stress and humiliation of being treated like a criminal when trying to start a legitimate business. Palmer told Maya about this encounter because it taught him an important lesson. Apologies were not magic words that erased harm. People had no obligation to forgive someone just because that person felt remorseful. The real work was not in seeking forgiveness but in changing behavior and working to prevent future harm. That was why Palmer focused his energy on the training programs, rather than trying to get individual victims to absolve him. He could not undo what he had done to Maya or anyone else, but he could help create systems that made such discrimination less likely. Maya sat back in her chair, processing everything Palmer had said. She had come to this meeting expecting excuses or self-serving justifications. Instead, she found someone who seemed genuinely changed by consequences. That did not mean she forgave him, or that they would become friends. The harm he caused her could not be erased by good intentions. But she could acknowledge that he was doing meaningful work to address discrimination. That work mattered regardless of his personal motivations. She told Palmer that she appreciated him sharing these details and being honest about his journey. Palmer thanked her for listening. He stood to leave, recognizing that he had taken enough of Maya's time. But before he left, he wanted to tell her one more thing. Maya's courage in not accepting his discrimination quietly had inspired changes that went far beyond what happened to him personally. Young people who might have stayed silent about their own experiences were now speaking up. Institutions that might have ignored complaints were now taking them seriously. The conversation about discrimination had shifted because Maya and Victoria refused to let the incident be swept away. Palmer said he was genuinely grateful that Maya's story had sparked such important changes, even if his role in that story was as the villain. After Palmer left, Maya remained at the coffee shop for a while, thinking about their conversation. She felt neither satisfied nor disappointed, just thoughtful. Palmer's transformation seemed genuine, but time would tell if it lasted. More importantly, that evening Maya met her mother at an upscale restaurant in the business district. Victoria had reserved a private dining room where they could talk without being overheard or interrupted. The space was elegant but understated, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture that encouraged relaxed conversation. Maya arrived first and was reviewing research notes on her tablet when Victoria entered. Looking professional in a tailored suit despite the late hour, the two women embraced briefly before settling into their seats, both recognizing they had much to discuss. Victoria asked about Maya's meeting with Palmer, and Maya shared the details of their conversation. She described Palmer's apparent transformation, his work with the Fair Treatment Initiative, and his willingness to acknowledge his privilege. Victoria listened carefully, asking occasional questions but mostly letting Maya process her thoughts aloud. When Maya finished, Victoria offered her perspective. Palmer's redemption story was interesting, but ultimately not very important. What mattered was that the systems they had created would continue functioning, regardless of Palmer's personal journey. Individual transformation was nice when it happened, but systemic change was what really protected people from discrimination. Maya agreed with that assessment. She told her mother that meeting Palmer had provided some closure, but more importantly, it had reinforced her understanding of why Victoria's approach had been correct. Going after Palmer personally would have been satisfying but temporary. Creating the Fair Treatment Initiative and implementing training programs across the industry had lasting impact. Victoria smiled at her daughter's words. She said that Maya was learning important lessons about how power could be used effectively. Revenge felt good in the moment but rarely accomplished meaningful goals. Strategic action that addressed root causes was harder work, but produced better results. Their food arrived and they ate while discussing Victoria's plans for expanding the initiative. The Mars offices were now fully operational and handling cases from the Red Planet's growing population. The Belt colonies presented unique challenges because their scattered locations made coordinated advocacy difficult. But Victoria had hired talented organizers who were building networks among the mining communities and station populations. She estimated it would take another year before the initiative had truly solar system-wide reach, but the foundation was being built carefully and thoroughly. Victoria asked about Maya's research and her daughter's face lit up as she described the extremophile organisms they were studying. The microbes had developed extraordinary survival mechanisms that challenged existing theories about life's limitations. One species could survive complete dehydration for months, reviving instantly when water became available. Another had proteins that remained functional at temperatures that should have destroyed all biological molecules. These discoveries had implications far beyond academic interest. Understanding how life adapted to extreme conditions could guide humanity's search for organisms on other worlds. Victoria confessed that while she supported Maya's work, she did not fully understand the science behind it, but she understood passion and dedication when she saw them. Maya's excitement about her research reminded Victoria of her own feelings when building Carter Industries. That sense of purpose, of working toward something meaningful, was what made life worthwhile. Victoria had found her purpose in business and social advocacy. Maya had found hers in scientific discovery. Both paths were valid and important. Victoria told Maya how proud she was that her daughter had remained focused on her true goals, despite all the distractions created by the bank incident. Maya appreciated hearing that. She admitted there had been moments over the past 6 months when the attention felt overwhelming. Requests for interviews, invitations to speak at events, people treating her like a symbol rather than a scientist. Maya had turned down most of those opportunities, protecting her time and energy for research. But she sometimes worried that declining made her seem ungrateful or unsupportive of the broader movement against discrimination. Victoria assured her that protecting boundaries was not ungrateful. Maya had already contributed more than most people by sharing her story. She had no obligation to become a full-time activist if that was not her calling. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. Victoria shared amusing stories from board meetings and business negotiations. Maya described the quirky personalities among her fellow researchers at Helix 7. For a while, they were simply mother and daughter enjoying each other's company, not discussing discrimination or social justice or business strategy. These moments of normalcy had become rare as both their lives grew busier. Maya treasured them more than she had when younger. She understood now that time with loved ones was precious and should not be taken for granted. Over dessert, Victoria mentioned something that had been on her mind. The Fair Treatment Initiative had received thousands of applications from people seeking help with discrimination cases. Each application represented someone who had suffered unfair treatment and found the courage to fight back. Victoria's legal teams were working as quickly as possible, but they could not help everyone immediately. Some cases took months to investigate and prosecute. Other cases, while legitimate, did not have enough evidence to pursue successfully. Victoria found it frustrating that resources were finite even with her substantial financial commitment. Maya asked if her mother had considered recruiting other wealthy individuals to contribute to similar initiatives. Victoria nodded, saying she had approached several billionaires and major corporations about funding discrimination prevention programs. Some had agreed to contribute, seeing the public relations benefits of associating with anti-discrimination work. Others had politely declined, uncomfortable with the initiative's aggressive stance against institutional prejudice. A few had been hostile, viewing the whole effort as political correctness gone too far. Victoria was not discouraged by the resistance. Building movements took time and persistence. Victoria revealed that she was considering establishing an endowment that would fund the Fair Treatment Initiative permanently. 500 million credits was substantial, but it would eventually run out if cases continued at the current rate. An endowment of several billion credits could generate enough investment returns to fund the initiative indefinitely. That way the work would continue even after Victoria was no longer around to oversee it. Maya found the idea simultaneously impressive and sobering. Her mother was planning for a future she would not see, ensuring that the systems they built would outlast their creators. Maya asked if Victoria ever regretted the amount of time and money devoted to the initiative. The commitment was enormous and took attention away from Carter Industries' business operations. Victoria considered the question seriously before answering. She admitted there were moments when managing both the company and the initiative felt overwhelming. Board meetings and business deals still required her attention, but the satisfaction of using her wealth for meaningful social change outweighed any regrets. She had more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. Using it to fight discrimination felt like the right thing to do, perhaps the most important thing she had ever done. Victoria also revealed something she rarely discussed. Building Carter Industries had been driven partly by a desire to prove herself, to show everyone who doubted her that she could succeed. Every business victory was evidence that she belonged at the table with powerful executives. But that validation seeking had left her feeling somewhat empty despite all her success. The initiative was different because it was not about proving anything. It was about helping people who needed help, using power to protect rather than accumulate. That purpose gave Victoria a sense of fulfillment that no business deal had ever provided. Maya understood what her mother meant. Scientific research gave her similar feelings of purpose. Discovering how extremophile organisms survived impossible conditions would not make her rich or famous, but it would expand human knowledge and potentially help future explorers survive harsh environments on distant worlds. That contribution to something larger than herself was what made the work meaningful. Maya and Victoria recognized in that moment how similar they actually were despite their different careers. Both sought purpose in their work. Both wanted to contribute something lasting. Both refused to accept limitations imposed by others' expectations. As dinner ended and they prepared to leave, Victoria mentioned one final thing. She had been approached by several universities about establishing scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to study science or business. The scholarships would be named after Maya, recognizing her achievement and the discrimination she had overcome. Victoria wanted Maya's permission before proceeding. Maya considered the proposal carefully. She disliked the attention, but loved the idea of helping students who faced similar barriers she had encountered. She agreed on the condition that the scholarships focus on merit and potential, rather than treating recipients as charity cases. Victoria promised the scholarships would be designed exactly as Maya requested. 1 year after the bank incident, Maya stood once again in the observation deck of Helix 7, watching Earth turn slowly beneath the stars. But this time she was not alone. 3 new researchers had joined the xenobiology team, hired specifically to help with the expanded project studying extremophile organisms from Saturn's moons. The samples had arrived 2 weeks ago, carefully preserved during their long journey from the outer solar system. Maya and her colleagues had already identified several, promising specimens that displayed survival mechanisms even more remarkable than the Jupiter organisms. The past year had been the most productive of Maya's career. Her research papers were being cited by scientists across the solar system. She had presented findings at major conferences and received invitations to collaborate with researchers at prestigious institutions. But Maya remained at Helix 7, committed to the work she had started. The station felt like home now. She knew all her colleagues by name, understood the rhythms of life in orbit, and appreciated the unique perspective that came from living among the stars. This was where she belonged, doing research that expanded human knowledge about life's possibilities. Yet even as Maya focused on her scientific work, she remained aware of the broader changes happening throughout society. The Fair Treatment Initiative had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. Victoria had established offices on 3 planets and dozens of space stations. The legal fund had handled over 800 discrimination cases, winning the vast majority. Those victories had established important precedents that made it harder for institutions to ignore complaints. The training programs had expanded beyond financial services to include retail businesses, government agencies, healthcare facilities, and educational institutions. Maya received regular updates from her mother about the initiative's progress. The most recent report showed that documented incidents of discrimination had decreased by 45% in sectors where training programs had been implemented. That number represented thousands of people who had not experienced what Maya went through. The cultural conversation about prejudice had shifted as well. People were more willing to acknowledge their biases, more likely to speak up when witnessing discrimination, more aware that society's tolerance for such behavior was declining. These changes came slowly and faced constant resistance, but they were real and measurable. The scholarship program that Victoria had established in Maya's name had awarded its first round of grants 6 months ago. 20 students from disadvantaged backgrounds received full funding to pursue degrees in science, engineering, or business. Maya had reviewed all 20 applications personally, moved by their stories of overcoming obstacles to pursue education. Several scholars had already reached out to thank her, sharing how the financial support had changed their lives. One young woman wrote that she had been planning to drop out of university due to costs. The scholarship allowed her to continue studying astrophysics and working toward her dream of becoming a planetary scientist. Maya kept that letter on her tablet and reread it whenever she felt overwhelmed by attention or frustrated with being known for discrimination rather than research. The scholarship program reminded her that good could emerge from painful experiences. Those 20 students would have opportunities they might not have received otherwise. Their future achievements would be part of the bank incident's legacy, showing that one terrible moment could spark positive changes that rippled through generations. Maya found comfort in that knowledge, understanding that her suffering had meaning beyond personal pain. As for Gregory Palmer, Maya had heard occasional updates through her mother's contacts at the initiative. Palmer continued volunteering and had become one of their most effective trainers. His willingness to examine his own prejudices publicly made the workshops more impactful. Participants could not dismiss bias training as unnecessary when they heard a real person describe how unconscious attitudes had destroyed his career. Palmer had also started speaking at schools and community centers about the importance of recognizing discrimination. He would never undo the harm he caused, but he was dedicating his remaining years to preventing others from making similar mistakes. Maya had not spoken with Palmer since their meeting in the coffee shop a year ago. She felt no need for further contact. His redemption arc was his own journey, separate from her life. But she appreciated knowing that he was doing constructive work, rather than simply wallowing in self-pity. Some people learned from consequences and some did not. Palmer appeared to be in the former category, which was more than many people achieved. Maya hoped his transformation was genuine and lasting, but ultimately whether Palmer changed or not mattered less than the systems Victoria had built to prevent future discrimination. Maya's communicator chimed with an incoming call from Earth. She moved to a quiet corner of the observation deck and accepted the connection. Her mother's face appeared in holographic form, looking tired but satisfied. Victoria was calling from her office at Carter Industries headquarters, surrounded by displays showing various business metrics and initiative statistics. She asked how Maya was doing and whether the new team members were working out well. Maya confirmed that the expanded research group was exceeding expectations. The collaboration was producing insights none of them could have achieved working alone. Victoria shared her own news. The endowment she had been planning was now established with an initial funding of 3 billion credits. Investment returns would provide steady income to support the Fair Treatment Initiative indefinitely. Victoria had also recruited 5 other billionaires to contribute substantial amounts, bringing the total endowment to over 5 billion credits. That capital would ensure the initiative could continue its work long after Victoria retired from active management. Legal teams, training programs, advocacy efforts, all would be funded permanently. The bank incident's impact would extend far into the future. Maya congratulated her mother on this achievement. Creating something that would outlast them both was remarkable. Victoria thanked her but noted that none of it would have happened without Maya's willingness to share her story. If Maya had chosen to stay silent, accepting the discrimination quietly, Palmer would still be working at the bank. The training programs would not exist. The legal fund would not be helping hundreds of people. Maya's courage in speaking up had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Victoria wanted her daughter to understand the significance of refusing to accept injustice. Maya accepted the acknowledgement, but insisted that Victoria deserved most of the credit. Maya had called her mother in distress. Victoria had transformed that distress into action. Victoria had used her resources strategically to create lasting change. Maya's role had been relatively passive, simply sharing what happened to her. Victoria had done the actual work of building systems, negotiating with organizations, and maintaining pressure on institutions to implement reforms. Both mother and daughter were being too modest, but both understood what the other meant. Their combined efforts had achieved something meaningful. They talked for a while longer, sharing updates about their respective work and making tentative plans for Maya's next visit to Earth. When the call ended, Maya remained in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate beneath her. From this distance, the planet looked peaceful and unified. The borders and conflicts that divided humanity were invisible from orbit. Maya often thought about how space exploration had changed human perspective. People who left Earth and looked back at their home planet often described feeling a sense of unity, seeing all humans as part of one species rather than separate tribes. That perspective informed Maya's research. She studied life's ability to survive in extreme conditions because she believed humanity's future lay among the stars. Earth was beautiful but finite. Eventually, humans would need to establish permanent settlements on other worlds. adapting to environments far harsher than anything Earth offered. Understanding how organisms survive such conditions would help future colonists thrive, rather than merely endure. Maya's work on extremophils was not just academic curiosity. It was practical research with implications for humanity's long-term survival, but humanity could not build a successful future in space while carrying the same prejudices and divisions that plagued Earth. The fair treatment, initiative, and similar efforts were necessary. Preparation for becoming a truly spacefaring species. People needed to learn to judge each other based on actions and character, rather than appearance or background. They needed systems that protected everyone fairly regardless of wealth or connections. They needed cultures that valued diversity and rejected discrimination. These social developments were just as important as technological advances in rockets and life support systems. Maya realized that her work and her mother's work were ultimately serving the same goal. Maya was helping humanity survive physically in harsh environments. Victoria was helping humanity survive socially by building more just systems. Both efforts were necessary. Both contributed to humanity's long-term success. Maya felt proud to be part of that larger project, even if her role had begun with humiliation in a bank.